As a massive fan of the Spintires series, particularly both MudRunner and Snowrunner that were released on the Nintendo Switch, I was very keen to check out the latest release, Spintires Expeditions on Nintendo Switch, to look at the performance as well as the gameplay and what's offered here. Now, there are 3 different versions available on the eShop. The base version, there's an edition that I believe gives 1 year of updates, and then there's a super duper version. But even with the base version, I think you'll probably be interested to see exactly how it performs and if it's worth actually picking up on Switch. Well, is it, or is it instead a muddy mess? Well, let's find out. First things first, there's been quite a lot of mention that the Nintendo Switch version doesn't actually feature any online options. What I will say though is, from the main menu, it makes it abundantly clear that this is on the way. So that's coming, we just don't know when. Also, the Nintendo Switch version is utilizing AMD FSR. It can actually be chosen from the options menu, or you can turn it off. And we'll have a look at what that looks like both on and off. As for pricing, well, you can see from the prices on the screen, it's not a cheap game. They are going for a premium experience and a premium price, but the base version at $44.99 seems like a reasonable offering. That is, if it runs well enough. Starting with the visuals, well, we can see even with the FSR, the base resolution must be incredibly low. More so certainly than both Snowrunner and MudRunner, which actually held up quite nicely on the Nintendo Switch. The image without FSR and with. It definitely makes a difference, and for sure, I am glad it's an option here. Despite the blurrier visuals, there is still quite a lot of detail in here, and the physics models are running very nicely. Shadows are rendered for most items, and they're not the lowest resolution shadows I've ever seen, but unfortunately the base resolution being so low means that certain environmental objects, like the mesh on a fence, can be entirely invisible. Smaller details, like the mud on your tires, they still show and are here, and whatever vehicle you're in, it will gather dust, dirt and grime as you move about the environments. For me, performance is always king, and here it looks that we're at 30 frames per second for a very good amount of time. Also, frame pacing seems solid. It doesn't feel stuttery or jerky. It's that visual quality that's going to be the main bugbear, I think, for a lot of people. Now, with that said, I did play the previous 2 games predominantly in handheld mode, and as you can see, by shrinking things down to the small screen, it looks much more serviceable. While the image looks better squashed down, the frame rate definitely drops below 30 often. That's a real shame in my opinion. They really should be able to maintain 30 FPS, so if you're someone that predominantly plays in handheld, you might be wanting to wait for a patch. Level of detail draw distance takes another big hit. As we move beyond the very close proximity of the vehicle, distant objects have their models significantly reduced in quality. Just check out this tree in the background. It looks like someone's made it out of paper while their eyes are closed. I will say that initial load times are actually quite substantial. When you're loaded into any of the 3 main areas, you're looking at upwards of a minute, but that once you're in game, there are very few, if any, other load transitions. If you're someone that likes to play using the internal view, you can do that here, but with obvious limitations that we've seen in the previous titles, such as your rear view and side mirrors not actually being functional. And while you can rotate to look completely over your shoulder, it does limit the usability of this viewpoint, certainly in certain situations. I have noticed a couple of bugs in the game. One of them relates to your binoculars. When you're zoomed in, it's okay, but as soon as you zoom out, the sensitivity goes down to almost 0. But then every now and then speeds up. It just feels a bit odd and I think needs fixing. With all of that said though, I do actually prefer the way the internal view uses the hands. They actually overlap and cross over in a little bit more of a realistic fashion. But unfortunately, getting that much closer to the visual issues like the shadows, which are so low resolution when you're in the interior of the vehicle, it creates some unusual shifting that's a bit of an eyesore. While it might sound like I think the visuals are terrible, there are times, certainly, and in certain environments where it can actually look quite nice. But it is testament that even with FSR, that image quality is this blurry. Gameplay then will feel very familiar to those who enjoyed the previous games. The Spintires series doesn't actually feel like a driving simulator per se, as much as it does like an RPG on wheels. You're given free rein to move freely around the world, and you discover and unlock loads of different vehicles that can be fully upgraded. From a control standpoint, rather than combat, you're fighting against the environments, be it muddy swamps, dense dense foliage or steep, rough terrain. And to battle against them, you have a number of tools at your disposal. This time around, the controls have seen a subtle but welcome streamlining. Picking up items is much easier. Making those deliveries is also just a button or two press away. As before, on the right hand of the screen, you have all the functions relating to the actual motor that you're currently using. You can set it to automatic transmission or manually control many different areas. Now on the left of the screen, and by holding the LB button, you can do several other things. You might need to repair your vehicle, so you can do that here or add more fuel to it, but you can also use the tyre deflation system to deflate or inflate your tyres to suit the terrain, thus increasing or decreasing your traction, but at the cost of fuel consumption. While there's some more complexity, it doesn't feel that way because of the streamlining of those controls and how clear it's made throughout the tutorial sections. Now each of the three main areas is split up into different expeditions. Think of those as your chapters within an RPG. They're your main quest line, your main missions, and by completing those you'll advance the storyline, uncover new areas, new vehicles, and hopefully have a lot of fun along the way. The first such expedition is rated as easy difficulty and simply has you travel to the mountains to install a radio module. It will show the amount of money you're going to get up front as well as the total payment and any rewards. You can expand and have a look at exactly what those are, but they're usually things like vehicles or vehicle specialists, as well as offering some bonus if you can complete the whole thing without taking a certain amount of damage. Then it's to decide exactly which vehicle to take, and just with an RPG, it's which character? What attributes do I want? Do I want the tank, or do I want the one that's light and fast? And here, do I want that scout vehicle that's lighter and able to traverse those environments? Or do I need the massive truck to carry a heavy load? And does it have enough inventory space to carry what I need it to? Now, specialists can be hired and assigned to an expedition to make things a little easier. From mechanics to logisticians, hydrologists, they each have their own benefits at a cost, but most of these are optional. And so once you've assigned up to 4 vehicles and 3 different specialists, you head out on your first expedition. As before, there's a lot of fun to be had in customizing each of those vehicles as well, whether it's adding devices to its exterior, upgrading the engine, gearbox, suspension, tires, winch or differential lock, or making the whole thing a very nice color. Or you can do all of that once again and even add some stickers to make it look pretty. The devices include a number of useful things like the echo sounder to determine how deep water bodies are before you go venturing into them, the binoculars to scout out long and far distant items, which can be really handy for looking at different routes, or the excellent drone, which is kind of self-explanatory, but can be so handy for just scouting ahead down a route to try and determine the best possible way to go. In a strange way, if you've played something like Death Stranding, you know just how different the choice of path can make the difficulty of that game. Here, having the drone means you can have a look in advance to a certain distance and just mitigate some of the potential frustrations that can crop up. Finally, of course, you have the trusty winch, a staple of the MudRunner series, which you can attach to almost any solid object in the world, sometimes even non-solid, to try and pull yourself out of tricky situations. There are more than just missions in this world though. Using things like your binoculars, you can discover airdrops, hidden caches and different vehicles that really adds to that sense of exploration and adventure. And by the very nature of the game, there are often times where you'll find yourself completely stuck in the mud and need to switch between your other available vehicles to come and rescue yourself, which might sound strange, but it's part and parcel to the experience and really rewarding when you manage to pull it off. The reason being, having to pay to get your vehicle recovered will put a serious dent in your finances. Upon the completion of a quest, you'll gain your currency, which is essentially experience, as it's what you'll use to level up your vehicles by purchasing those upgrades, and thus your experience progresses. Now the controls are absolutely perfect for this style. Using those devices or accessing items from your inventory, like placing an anchor point that you can then use to winch off of. Once you've got to grips with it, which only takes about half an hour, you're doing things that should be far more complex. And that's just a testament to the amount of refinement that's gone on throughout the different iterations in this series. This by far is the best to control, and of course includes the quality of life things we expect as well, such as HD rumble, which in a game that's all about texture and terrain makes a big difference to the way the game feels. The environments all come with a day-night cycle, which again introduce their own challenges to your navigation. And then you've got the sound. Now environmental sounds are really strong. Depending on where you are, they've captured the acoustics really well. Obviously the engines sound fantastic and always have done in this series, and the musical score I would class as minimalist and appropriate. That is to say, it's not playing all the time. Occasionally it will rise up in quieter moments, just giving some accompaniment to the proceedings on screen, only to die back down, making way for those environmental sounds. Personally, this has been the easiest of the Spintire games to get into. I think if you're a new player arriving to the series for the first time, this is a great place to start. There is a sense that it potentially holds your hand a little more than the other games, and that's going to be a positive or a negative depending on your stance. Now, regardless of that, you can still just go off on your own. There's the free roam mode as well as the online option, which will hopefully arrive in this Switch version. So there we have it. MudRunner fans, you're going to feel right at home, and there'll be a lot of new little tweaks and changes that make it once again a really interesting experience. I think there will be some division amongst fans about the level to which the game holds your hand, and certainly they need to do something with the performance in handheld mode, and of course the visual quality, and well, we don't have the co-op mode, which is just a shame. In those regards, it doesn't quite feel finished yet, and that alone will be enough to put some people off. Thanks to our Patreons and members, all of you that enjoy the content. I hope this has been of some use to you. And as always, just a big thanks for leaving comments. It gives me something to read and makes it really worthwhile. For all things Switch, all the time, keep it Switch up. Cheers, guys. See ya!